The flour dust caught the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, and Hannah Norwood's voice rose soft and pure with an old hymn her mother had taught her, the melody weaving through the small ranch house like smoke from the wood stove. She had been alone for 3 months now since her father passed, leaving her this modest property 10 miles outside South Pass City, Wyoming. And though loneliness pressed heavy some nights, she found solace in the rituals of daily life, in the simple pleasure of working dough beneath her palms while the world outside remained wild and uncertain in this year of 1878. The bread was rising for the second time when she heard the horse approaching, hooves crunching on the dry earth, and she wiped her hands on her apron before glancing toward the door, wondering who would ride out this far on a Tuesday morning when most folks stayed close to town. Wade Northfield had been riding since dawn, following the fence line of the Patterson Ranch where he worked as foreman, checking for breaks and weak posts that might let cattle wander. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from hard work, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. The scent reached him before he saw the house, the unmistakable smell of fresh bread baking, and his stomach reminded him that he had left before breakfast, too eager to finish his rounds and get back to town for supplies. The little ranch house sat nestled against a backdrop of sage-covered hills, smoke rising lazy from the chimney, and he guided his horse toward it without overthinking the decision, drawn by hunger and curiosity in equal measure. Hannah heard the knock and smoothed her hair back, tucking a loose strand behind her ear before opening the door. The man standing on her porch was a stranger, though something in his face seemed open and honest, the kind of face that worked for a living and did not expect favors. He removed his hat immediately, revealing those dark curls, and offered a slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Madam, I apologize for disturbing you," he said, his voice rough from disuse, as though he spent more time talking to horses than people. "I have been riding fence line since early and I caught the smell of your baking. I was wondering if you might have bread to spare. I can pay." Hannah studied him for a moment, noting the worn but clean clothes, the respectful distance he maintained, the way his hands worked the brim of his hat. Her father had always said you could tell a man's character by how he treated those who had nothing to offer him, and this man seemed to be asking, not demanding, which counted for something in her estimation. "I have bread cooling," she said, stepping back from the doorway. "You are welcome to some, and I will not take your money for simple hospitality. Come in and sit while I slice it for you." Wade hesitated only a moment before crossing the threshold, his boots loud on the wooden floor. The house was small but immaculately kept, with lace curtains at the windows and a rag rug covering the center of the main room. The kitchen area occupied one corner, and he could see 2 loaves of golden bread resting on a towel-covered table, steam still rising from their crusts. The woman moved with practiced efficiency, cutting thick slices and setting them on a blue-rimmed plate, then reaching for a crock of butter and a jar of honey. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to the table, and he obeyed, placing his hat on his knee. She set the plate before him along with the butter and honey, then poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "I am Hannah Norwood. My father owned this place until he passed in November. I am sorry for your loss," Wade said, and meant it. He had lost his own father to pneumonia 2 years prior, understood that particular hollow ache. "I am Wade Northfield. I work as foreman on the Patterson Ranch about 5 miles east of here." Hannah nodded, settling into the chair across from him. She watched as he buttered the bread and took his first bite, saw his eyes close briefly in appreciation, and felt a small swell of pride at the reaction. Baking was one of the things she did well, one of the skills her mother had passed down before the fever took her when Hannah was 16. She was 22 now, old enough to be considered a spinster by some standards, though she had never much worried about that designation. She had been too busy helping her father run the ranch, learning to manage cattle and chickens, and the endless work that came with keeping a property alive. "This is the best bread I've had in months," Wade said after swallowing. "Maybe longer than that. You have a real talent for it." "Thank you," Hannah replied, feeling warmth creep into her cheeks at the compliment. "I make it 3 times a week usually. It keeps well enough, and I trade some in town for other goods." They talked while he ate, the conversation flowing easier than either of them expected. He told her about working the Patterson ranch, about the challenges of keeping cattle healthy and fences strong in this high country where winters came fierce and summers baked everything brown. She told him about learning to manage the ranch alone, about the small herd of cattle she maintained, and the chickens that provided eggs for trading. The more they talked, the more Wade found himself studying her face, noting the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about things that mattered to her, the curve of her mouth when she smiled at something he said. When he finally rose to leave, the sun had climbed higher, and he knew he had stayed longer than intended. But he found himself reluctant to mount his horse and ride away, some part of him wanting to linger in this warm kitchen with this woman who hummed while baking and spoke with such quiet intelligence about the land. "Thank you for the bread and the company," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "I do not suppose I could impose upon your generosity again sometime. I could bring payment in other forms, help with repairs or heavy work you might need done." Hannah considered this, recognizing the offer for what it was, an excuse to return, a way to see each other again without admitting to deeper interest. She had not felt drawn to a man in longer than she could remember, had resigned herself to a life alone after her father's death. But something about Wade Northfield made her reconsider that resignation, made her want to know more about the man behind those creek water eyes. "I could use help repairing the chicken coop," she said slowly. "The door is coming loose from its hinges, and I have not had success fixing it myself. If you wanted to come by Saturday afternoon, I could pay you in bread and supper." "That sounds more than fair," Wade agreed, and the smile he gave her was genuine and warm. "I will see you Saturday then." She watched him ride away, dust rising from his horse's hooves, and only when he disappeared over the rise did she return to her kitchen. The bread needed to be wrapped and stored, and she had other work waiting, but her mind kept returning to the conversation, to the way his voice had softened when he spoke about his own father's death, to the respect he had shown her when he could have been forward or presumptuous. She found herself humming again as she worked, a different tune this time, something brighter and more hopeful. Saturday came after what felt like a very long week. Hannah rose early and worked through her chores with unusual energy, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, checking on her small herd, pulling weeds from the vegetable garden she maintained behind the house. She baked fresh bread in the morning and put a venison roast in the oven to cook slowly through the afternoon, adding potatoes and carrots from her root cellar. She told herself this was simply good hospitality, that she would do the same for anyone coming to help with repairs. But she changed her dress twice, before finally settling on a dark blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Wade arrived mid-afternoon as promised, riding the same sturdy bay horse and carrying a small toolbox tied behind his saddle. He had taken extra care with his appearance, shaving close and wearing a clean shirt, his best hat brushed free of trail dust. When Hannah opened the door, he felt his breath catch slightly at the sight of her in that blue dress, her honey-colored hair pulled back but with soft tendrils framing her face. "The chicken coop is around back," she said, leading him through the house and out the rear door. The coop was well built but showed signs of age, and he could see immediately what she meant about the door. The leather hinges had dried and cracked, and the wood frame had warped slightly. It was fixable, would take him maybe an hour if he worked steady. "I can mend this," he told her. "Do you have leather scraps? And I will need to plane down this edge where it has swollen." "I have leather in the barn," Hannah said. "My father kept supplies for tack repair. I will show you." They walked together to the small barn, and Wade noted how she moved with confidence across her property, pointing out where she kept different supplies, explaining her system of organization. He found what he needed and returned to the chicken coop while she went back inside to check on supper. He worked steadily, aware of her presence even when he could not see her, hyper-conscious of being on her land in her space. The work went smoothly, and when he tested the repaired door, it swung true and latched properly. He was cleaning his tools when Hannah emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and stood beside him, inspecting his work. "That is much better," she said approvingly. "I have been propping it shut with a stick. The raccoons were getting clever about working it open." "It should hold now," Wade said, sipping the coffee. It was good and strong the way he liked it. "The leather is thick enough to last several years if you oil it occasionally." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over her property. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the air had that particular clarity that came with high altitude and dry climate. Wade found himself wishing for a reason to stay longer, to extend this peaceful moment. "Supper should be ready soon," Hannah said, as if reading his thoughts. "Would you like to wash up at the pump?" They ate at her small table, the roast tender and flavorful, the vegetables cooked to perfection. Wade could not remember the last time he had eaten a meal this good, certainly nothing since his mother had passed 5 years ago. The men on the Patterson ranch took turns cooking, and while they managed to keep from starving, none of them had any real skill in the kitchen. "You are an excellent cook," he said honestly. "This is a real feast." "I enjoy cooking when I have someone to cook for," Hannah admitted. "It seems less worthwhile when it is just me." The conversation during dinner ranged across many topics. She asked about his work on the Patterson ranch, and he described the daily rhythms of ranch life, the seasonal demands, the satisfaction of working with animals and land. He asked about her plans for her property, and she spoke about wanting to expand her herd, about possibly adding more chickens or even trying to raise pigs. "It is hard to manage alone," she confessed. "My father and I worked together, divided the tasks. Now I find myself constantly behind, always something that needs doing and not enough hours in the day." "You could hire help," Wade suggested. "There are men in South Pass City looking for work." "Perhaps," Hannah said, though her tone suggested doubt. "I am not sure I could afford to pay anyone fairly, and having a stranger here, a man I did not know well, living on the property." She trailed off, the implications clear. Wade understood. A single woman living alone had to be careful about reputation, about appearances. One wrong move, one poor choice, and the town gossips would tear her apart. It was unfair but unavoidable. "I could help when I have time," he offered carefully. "The Patterson ranch is not so far. I could ride over on Sunday afternoons, help with heavier work. You could pay me in meals if you wanted, or we could call it neighborly assistance." Hannah met his eyes across the table, searching for his motivation, trying to gauge his sincerity. What she saw there reassured her. Genuine interest, yes, but also respect and honest desire to help. She made her decision quickly, following her instinct. "I would appreciate that," she said. But I insist on paying you properly, either in cash or trade. I will not take advantage of your generosity." They worked out an arrangement over coffee and slices of apple pie that Hannah produced from her pie safe. Wade would come on Sunday afternoons when he could spare the time, help with projects that required extra hands or more strength than she possessed. She would provide meals and could trade bread, eggs, or vegetables as she had surplus. It was a practical arrangement that benefited both of them, and if it also provided an excuse to spend time together, neither of them acknowledged that aloud. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt natural and right. Wade came most Sundays, sometimes missing one when ranch duties kept him away, but mostly appearing mid-afternoon with his toolbox and a willingness to tackle whatever project Hannah had identified during the week. He repaired fence posts, reinforced the barn door, helped her move a heavy dresser that had belonged to her parents. She fed him generously and sent him back to the ranch with fresh bread, jars of preserves, eggs wrapped carefully in straw. They talked while they worked, learning each other's histories and dreams. Wade told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about coming west after his parents died because he needed a change, needed to escape the memories that haunted every corner of that property. He had worked various ranch jobs before landing the foreman position with Patterson, had proven himself reliable and skilled with both cattle and men. Hannah shared her own story, how her mother had died when she was young, how she had grown close to her father in the years that followed. He had taught her everything about running a ranch, never treating her as less capable because she was female. His death had devastated her, but it had also freed her in strange ways, allowed her to make her own choices about her life and future. As spring turned toward summer in 1878, their friendship deepened into something more, though neither rushed to name it. Wade found himself thinking about Hannah during his workdays, looking forward to Sundays with an intensity that surprised him. Hannah caught herself humming more often, found herself planning meals that she thought he would particularly enjoy, choosing dresses that she knew looked well on her. It was early June when things shifted between them. Wade had been helping Hannah plant a new section of garden, both of them working in the warm sun, hands deep in dark earth. When they finished, hot and tired, Hannah brought out a pitcher of cold water from the spring house and 2 cups. They sat in the shade of the house, drinking gratefully, and Wade found himself studying the curve of her neck where it disappeared into her collar, the way damp tendrils of hair clung to her temples. "Hannah," he said, his voice rough. She turned to look at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I need to tell you something, and I hope it will not make things awkward between us." "What is it?" she asked, though she thought she might know, could see it in the intensity of his gaze. "I've come to care for you," Wade said, the words coming out in a rush. "More than as a friend or neighbor. These past months, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant everything to me. I think about you constantly, and I know that if I do not tell you how I feel, I will regret it. I understand if you do not feel the same way, and if that is the case, I will respect your wishes and we can continue as we have been. But I needed you to know." Hannah set down her cup, her heart racing. She had known this was coming, had felt the tension building between them, the way his hands lingered when he helped her down from a wagon, the way his eyes followed her movements. And she had felt the same pull, the same growing attachment that went far beyond simple friendship. "I care for you too," she said softly. "I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself. After my father died, I thought I would spend my life alone, that I had missed my chance for marriage and family. But then you appeared, and everything changed. I look forward to your visits more than I can say. When you are not here, I find myself wishing you were. I think about what you might say about things that happen. Imagine telling you stories and hearing your laugh. Wade moved closer, reaching for her hand. She let him take it, felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "Can I court you properly?" he asked. "With the intention of marriage, if you will have me." "Yes," Hannah answered, the word coming without hesitation. "Yes, I would like that very much." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently, and the gesture was so tender that Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. They sat close together in the shade, hands clasped, talking about what this meant, what they both wanted. Wade made it clear that he respected her independence, that he would not expect her to give up her ranch or become diminished in any way. Hannah expressed her desire for partnership, for building a life together rather than simply joining his existing one. The courtship that followed was sweet and intense, both of them aware that they were no longer young and foolish, that they knew their own minds and hearts. Wade came more often than just Sundays, riding over after work when he could spare the hours, bringing small gifts. Wild flowers picked on the trail, a hair ribbon purchased in South Pass City, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Hannah baked his favorite foods, mended his shirts when they needed repair, listened with genuine interest to his stories about work and the world beyond her ranch. They were careful about propriety, always leaving the door open when he was inside her house, making sure he left well before dark to avoid scandalous speculation. But they found moments for intimacy within those bounds, holding hands while walking her property, his arm around her shoulders as they sat watching the sunset. Stolen kisses in the barn that grew longer and deeper as the weeks passed. In late July, Wade spoke to Mr. Patterson about his intentions. The older man was pleased, had known his foreman was riding out to the Norwood place regularly, and approved of the match. He offered Wade a small house on the ranch property that currently sat empty, said they could live there after the wedding if they wished, though Wade explained that Hannah had her own property and might want to stay there. "Whatever you work out is fine with me," Patterson said genially. "You are a good man, Northfield, and you deserve happiness. If you need time off for a wedding trip, you let me know." Wade thanked him and rode directly to Hannah's ranch, arriving as she was taking bread from the oven. She looked up as he entered, surprised by his early appearance, and immediately saw the excitement in his face. "I spoke to Patterson," he said without preamble. "He has given us his blessing and offered housing if we want it, though I told him you have your own property. Hannah, I know we have only been courting a couple of months, but I am certain of my feelings. I want to marry you, build a life with you. Would you consent to be my wife?" Hannah set down the bread and crossed to him, flour still dusting her hands. "I will marry you," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I love you, Wade Northfield, and I want nothing more than to be your wife." He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, tasting flour and honey and happiness. They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long moment, both overwhelmed by the enormity of the commitment they had just made, the future that stretched before them. They decided on a September wedding, giving them time to make proper preparations, but not waiting unnecessarily long. Hannah wanted to be married in the small church in South Pass City, with the minister who had presided over her father's funeral conducting the ceremony. Wade agreed readily, having no strong preferences beyond wanting to make her happy. The news spread quickly through the small community. Hannah had few close friends but was well regarded by the townspeople who knew her from her trading visits. Wade was respected as a hardworking, honest man. Several women in town offered to help Hannah prepare for the wedding, contributing recipes and advice about setting up a household. Mrs. Patterson, the ranch owner's wife, gave Hannah a beautiful quilt that had been in her family for years, calling it a wedding gift and welcoming her to the extended ranch family. August passed in a blur of preparation. Hannah sewed a new dress for the ceremony, choosing a soft cream-colored fabric that complemented her coloring. Wade arranged for time away from work and made plans for their brief wedding trip. They decided that Hannah would keep her ranch, but that they would live primarily on the Patterson property in the house that had been offered, as it was closer to Wade's work and would make daily life easier. They would use her ranch for additional income, keeping the chickens and small herd there, making regular trips to maintain the property. The practical discussions were interspersed with moments of romance and intimacy, both of them eager for the wedding night when they could finally be fully together. Wade was careful to remain respectful, never pushing her beyond what was proper, but Hannah saw the desire in his eyes and felt its echo in her own body. The waiting was both sweet and torturous, anticipation building with each passing day. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the September sky brilliant blue and cloudless. Hannah woke early in her ranch house, alone for the last time as an unmarried woman. She took her time preparing, bathing in the copper tub and washing her hair, then carefully dressing in her new gown. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Clara, came to help with her hair, pinning it up in an elegant style and weaving in tiny white flowers that had been gathered from the hills. Wade spent the morning at the ranch, trying to focus on last-minute tasks but mostly watching the clock. He wore new clothes purchased specifically for the occasion: dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest of charcoal gray. His hands shook slightly as he tied his necktie, and Patterson clapped him on the shoulder, laughing. "Steady, man," the older rancher said. "She has already agreed to marry you. All you have to do is show up and say your vows." "I know," Wade replied, managing a nervous smile. "I just want everything to be perfect for her." The church was small but filled with well-wishers when Wade arrived. He stood at the front with the minister, heart pounding, until the door opened and Hannah entered on the arm of Mr. Patterson, who had agreed to walk her down the aisle in the absence of her father. Wade forgot to breathe for a moment, seeing her in that cream dress with flowers in her hair, her face radiant with happiness and love. She met his eyes and smiled, and everything else faded away until there was only the two of them and the promises they were about to make. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke traditional vows, pledging to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever challenges life brought. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Wade kissed his new bride, the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, both grinning widely, and emerged into the bright afternoon sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Northfield. A modest reception followed at the Patterson Ranch, with food and drink and dancing in the large barn that had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. Hannah danced with her new husband, then with Mr. Patterson and several other ranchers. Wade danced with Mrs. Patterson and Clara, but his eyes never strayed far from Hannah, constantly seeking her out across the crowded space. As evening approached, they made their escape, riding together on Wade's horse toward the small house that would be their first home together. Someone had been there ahead of them, lighting lamps and building up the fire, leaving covered dishes of food and a bottle of wine on the table. The bed had been made up with fresh linens, and the quilt Mrs. Patterson had given them. Wade carried Hannah across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. He set her down gently in the main room, and suddenly, the laughter faded as they realized they were finally alone, finally married, that nothing stood between them and the full expression of their love. "Are you nervous?" Wade asked softly, reaching to cup her face in his hands. "A little," Hannah admitted, "but mostly I am happy. I have waited for this for you. I love you, Wade." "I love you too," he replied, leaning down to kiss her. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. I promise I will do everything I can to make you happy." They undressed each other slowly, taking time to explore and discover, to express physically what they had held back for months. Wade was gentle and patient, making sure Hannah felt cherished and safe. Hannah responded with a passion that surprised them both, giving herself fully to the experience and to him. They came together in love and tenderness, and afterward lay wrapped in each other's arms, exhausted and content. "That was worth waiting for," Hannah murmured against his chest, and felt his laugh rumble through his body. "It certainly was," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And we have the rest of our lives to continue discovering each other." They spent their first days of marriage mostly alone, exploring their new home and each other, learning the rhythms of sharing space and life. Wade taught Hannah things about his work that she had not known, explaining the business side of ranching and the challenges Patterson faced. Hannah shared her knowledge of gardening and food preservation, her skill with animals and land management. They talked for hours about their dreams for the future, about children they hoped to have, about building something lasting together. After a week, Wade returned to work and they fell into the pattern of married life. Hannah spent her days managing their household, cooking and cleaning, but also helping with ranch tasks when she was needed. She tended the large garden that had been planted behind their house, preserving food for winter. Several times a week, she and Wade rode to her ranch to care for the animals there and maintain the property. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days. But Hannah found that she loved these enforced periods of togetherness, loved sitting by the fire with Wade while storms raged outside, reading aloud or simply talking. They celebrated Christmas quietly with the Pattersons and other ranch families, exchanging modest gifts and sharing meals. In January of 1879, Hannah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Wade, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. When she finally shared the news one evening after supper, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Pure joy and excitement tempered with concern for her well-being. "Are you feeling well?" he asked anxiously, pulling her into his arms. "Do you need to see the doctor in town?" "I feel fine," Hannah assured him, laughing at his sudden nervousness. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong. But yes, I will see the doctor to make sure everything is progressing normally." Wade became even more protective as the pregnancy progressed, worrying about her doing too much physical work, insisting she rest more than she thought necessary. Hannah tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding that it came from love and fear of losing her or the baby. She continued her daily tasks, but did accept help more readily, letting Wade take on some of the heavier work she normally would have done herself. Spring brought new life to the land and anticipation of the new life growing within Hannah. She felt well throughout most of the pregnancy, only occasionally troubled by nausea or fatigue. She sewed baby clothes and blankets, preparing for the arrival with practical efficiency. Mrs. Patterson and other ranch women offered advice and assistance, sharing their own experiences with childbirth and child rearing. In early August, 3 weeks before her due date, Hannah's labor began in the middle of the night. Wade woke to find her breathing heavily through contractions, and panic briefly overwhelmed him before he forced himself to focus. He rode hard to fetch Mrs. Patterson and the doctor from town, then returned to stay with Hannah, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the following night. Wade remained at her side throughout, even when Mrs. Patterson suggested he might want to wait in another room. He refused to leave, needing to be there for Hannah, to support her through this ordeal. She drew strength from his presence, gripping his hand through the worst contractions, finding courage in his steady gaze. Their son was born just after midnight, arriving with a lusty cry that filled the small house. The doctor placed him in Hannah's arms, and she looked down at the tiny red face with overwhelming love. Wade knelt beside the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, touching the baby's impossibly small hand with one gentle finger. "He is perfect," Wade whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him Samuel, after Wade's father, with the middle name of Thomas after Hannah's father. Sam was a healthy baby with a good appetite and strong lungs, keeping his parents awake many nights in those first weeks. Hannah recovered well from the birth, regaining her strength and adapting to the new demands of motherhood. Wade was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he was not working, walking the floor with Sam when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint. The months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small milestones. Sam's first smile, the first time he slept through the night, his attempts to roll over and eventually sit up. Hannah and Wade marveled at every development, finding joy in even the smallest changes. Their love for each other deepened as they experienced parenthood together, working as partners to care for their son. When Sam was 6 months old, they were able to start thinking about the future beyond immediate survival and infant care. Wade had been saving money carefully, and they discussed the possibility of expanding their holdings, perhaps purchasing more land adjacent to Hannah's ranch or investing in additional cattle. Hannah had continued to bake bread when she had time, and several people in South Pass City had expressed interest in purchasing from her regularly. They talked about the possibility of building that into a small business, something Hannah could manage from home while caring for Sam. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Wade continued his work as foreman, earning Patterson's trust and respect with his dedication and skill. Hannah managed their household and slowly built up her bread business, selling to the general store in town and to several restaurants. The income was modest but meaningful, giving her a sense of purpose beyond wife and mother. Sam grew from infant to toddler, beginning to walk and talk, keeping them busy and entertained with his endless energy and curiosity. In the spring of 1881, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising but no less joyful. Sam was nearly 2 years old enough to be a little more independent, and they felt ready to expand their family. Wade was thrilled at the prospect of another child, hoping perhaps for a daughter this time, though he insisted he would be equally happy with another son. This pregnancy felt easier than the first, possibly because Hannah knew what to expect and did not worry as much about every small sensation or concern. She continued her work throughout the pregnancy, baking and caring for Sam and managing the household. Wade remained attentive but less anxious, trusting that Hannah knew her own body and limits. Their daughter was born in November of 1881, arriving more quickly than Sam had, with less complication and drama. She was smaller than her brother had been, with wispy dark hair and her father's creek water eyes. They named her Margaret, called her Maggie from the start, and Sam was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to constantly touch her and help care for her. With 2 young children, life became busier and more chaotic. Hannah sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands on her time and energy, but Wade was consistently supportive, helping however he could and never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. They worked together as partners, dividing tasks and responsibilities, making decisions jointly about how to raise their children and manage their lives. The years flowed by, marked by birthdays and holidays and small domestic dramas. Sam started school in South Pass City, riding in with his father several days a week. Maggie grew from infant to toddler to young child, full of personality and opinions. Wade received a promotion of sorts when Patterson made him part owner of the ranch, acknowledging years of loyal service and skilled management. The additional income allowed them to make improvements to their home, adding an extra bedroom and enlarging the kitchen. Hannah's bread business continued to grow, and she eventually hired 2 other women to help with baking, turning it into a legitimate small enterprise that supplied most of South Pass City. She felt proud of what she had built, of the way she had taken a simple skill and transformed it into meaningful income. Wade encouraged her entrepreneurial efforts, never feeling threatened by her success or independence. In 1885, when Sam was 6 and Maggie 4, they made the decision to build a new house on Hannah's original ranch property. They wanted more space for their growing family and liked the idea of having their own land rather than living on Patterson's property. Wade worked with local builders to design a larger home with room for their children to grow, with a big kitchen for Hannah's baking business and a separate office for ranch management. The move was chaotic, but exciting. They spent weeks transporting belongings and setting up the new house, getting the children settled into new bedrooms. Sam was thrilled to have more room to explore, and Maggie loved having her own space to play. Wade built a larger barn and expanded the chicken coops, increasing their capacity for livestock. Hannah established a proper commercial kitchen for her bread business, with multiple ovens and workspace for her employees. Life in their new home was good. Wade still worked closely with Patterson, but had more autonomy to manage things his own way. Hannah's business thrived, and she took satisfaction in employing other women and providing quality products to the community. Their children grew healthy and happy, Sam showing interest in ranch work and learning from his father, Maggie displaying a talent for baking and often helping her mother in the kitchen. In 1887, Hannah discovered she was pregnant once more, this time unexpectedly and later in life than she had anticipated. She was 31 years old, Wade was 35, and they had assumed their family was complete. But the surprise pregnancy, after the initial shock wore off, was welcomed with joy. Sam and Maggie were excited about the prospect of a new sibling, though Sam expressed a preference for a brother while Maggie lobbied hard for a sister. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, with Hannah experiencing more discomfort and fatigue. Wade worried constantly, remembering how hard Sam's birth had been, fearing complications. But Hannah remained calm and confident, trusting her body and the experienced doctor who attended her. Their second son, William, was born in early 1888, arriving during a spring snowstorm that made getting the doctor to the ranch an adventure. The labor was mercifully quick, and Will was healthy and strong from the start. Sam and Maggie were enchanted with their new brother, taking turns holding him and helping care for him. At 8 and 6 years old, they were old enough to be genuinely helpful, and Hannah appreciated their assistance. The house that had seemed so spacious when they moved in suddenly felt full and busy, alive with the sounds and energy of 3 children. Wade thrived in the chaos, loving the noise and activity, the sense of family and belonging. Hannah sometimes felt stretched thin, managing her business and household and children, but she had help from her employees and from Wade, who remained an involved and supportive partner. The years of raising their children were filled with countless small moments that accumulated into a life. Teaching Sam to ride properly, watching Maggie learn to bake her first loaf of bread, seeing Will take his first steps. There were challenges too, childhood illnesses that frightened them, arguments and discipline issues, the constant balancing act of work and family. But through it all, Hannah and Wade remained united, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. As the children grew older, they became more involved in the family enterprises. Sam worked alongside his father, learning ranch management and cattle handling. Maggie helped in the bakery, showing real talent and eventually taking over some of the daily operations. Will, the youngest, split his time between both pursuits, interested in everything and eager to learn. In 1895, when Sam was 16, he asked his parents if he could take on more responsibility with the ranch. He was tall and strong, capable and mature beyond his years. Wade and Hannah discussed it privately and agreed to give him supervisory duties over some of the ranch hands, letting him prove himself capable of leadership. Sam rose to the challenge, and Wade felt profound pride watching his son grow into a capable young man. Maggie, at 14, formally became Hannah's business partner, taking charge of production scheduling and quality control for the bakery. She had inherited her mother's talent and work ethic, and Hannah trusted her judgment completely. Mother and daughter worked side by side, their relationship evolving from parent-child to something closer to equals and friends. Will, at 7, was still young but showing promise in both ranching and business. He was bright and curious, always asking questions and seeking to understand how things worked. Wade and Hannah took care not to push him toward any particular path, wanting him to find his own direction. In the late 1890s, South Pass City experienced a period of growth as mining operations in the area expanded. The population increased, and with it came demand for Hannah's baked goods. She expanded the business again, hiring more employees and increasing production. The bakery became one of the most successful small businesses in town, known throughout the region for the quality of its products. Wade's partnership with Patterson continued to flourish. When the older man began to slow down in his late 60s, Wade took on even more of the operational responsibilities. Patterson treated Wade like a son, and when he passed away in 1899, he left a significant portion of the ranch to Wade in his will. The Patterson children, all grown and living elsewhere, were content with the arrangement, recognizing that Wade had been the force keeping the ranch profitable and strong. The new century arrived with hope and celebration. Sam was 21, working full-time as ranch manager. Maggie was 19, and had taken over day-to-day operations of the bakery, allowing Hannah to step back slightly. Will was 12, still in school but helping out whenever he could. Wade and Hannah, now in their late 40s, found themselves entering a new phase of life, still active and vital but with less of the daily grind falling directly on their shoulders. They took advantage of their relative freedom to travel more, making trips to Denver, and even once to San Francisco, seeing parts of the world they had only read about. But they always returned gladly to their ranch in Wyoming, to the life they had built together over more than 2 decades of marriage. Sam met a young woman named Elizabeth Carter in 1901, and Wade and Hannah watched with knowing smiles as their son experienced the first flush of courtship and love. They married the following year, and Sam brought his bride to live on the ranch in a house Wade helped him build on the property. Hannah welcomed Elizabeth warmly, grateful that her son had found someone who clearly loved him and shared his values. Maggie proved more independent, showing no interest in marriage despite several suitors over the years. She was devoted to the bakery and seemed content with her single life. Hannah understood, having been older herself when she married, and never pressured her daughter to follow a traditional path. If Maggie was happy, that was enough. Will went off to university in 1906, choosing to study agricultural science with the intention of bringing modern techniques back to the ranch. Wade and Hannah were proud of his ambition and intellectual curiosity, though they missed him during his years away. In 1904, Sam and Elizabeth made Wade and Hannah grandparents for the first time, with the birth of their son Jacob. Holding her first grandchild, Hannah felt the circle of life continuing, remembered her own parents who had not lived to see her children. She thought of her father and wished he could have known this joy, could have seen the family she and Wade had created. More grandchildren followed over the years. Sam and Elizabeth had 3 more children, while Will eventually married and started his own family after returning from university. Maggie remained devoted to her bakery, but was a beloved aunt, spoiling her nieces and nephews and teaching them to bake. Wade and Hannah grew older gracefully, their hair turning gray but their spirits remaining youthful. They still worked, though less intensively than in their younger years, spending more time with grandchildren and traveling when the mood struck. Their love had matured from the passionate intensity of early marriage into something deeper and more comfortable, a partnership so complete that they often knew what the other was thinking without words. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children organized a grand celebration, inviting the entire community to the ranch for food and music and dancing. Hannah and Wade stood together surrounded by their family, by the life they had built from that first encounter when she was baking bread alone and he appeared at her door, hungry and hopeful. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hannah asked quietly, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "All of this when you knocked on my door that morning asking for bread." Wade wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I imagined something," he admitted. "Not this exactly, but something like it. I knew from that first conversation that you were special, that if I could convince you to let me into your life, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." "I fell in love with you so quickly," Hannah confessed. "I tried to be cautious to protect my heart, but you made it impossible. You were so kind and respectful, so genuine. And when you said you wanted to taste my sweetness every day, to be part of my life permanently, I knew I would never want anything else. And I have tasted your sweetness every single day since," Wade murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "In your cooking and your kindness, in your strength and your laughter, in every moment we have shared. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and more than I knew to hope for." They danced together as the sun set over the Wyoming hills, surrounded by family and friends, celebrating 3 decades of love and partnership. Their children watched with misty eyes, recognizing the depth of connection between their parents, hoping to build something equally strong in their own lives. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and fulfillment. Wade eventually retired from active ranch management, turning operations over to Sam while remaining available for advice and support. Hannah fully retired from the bakery when she turned 60, leaving Maggie in complete control. They spent their later years enjoying their grandchildren, maintaining their home and small personal garden, traveling when they felt energetic enough. In 1920, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them, with a simple dinner at home. They were both in their late 60s, slowing down but still vital, still in love. They sat on their front porch watching the sunset, holding hands the way they had so many years ago when their love was new. "I would do it all again," Hannah said softly. "Every single moment, every challenge and triumph, every ordinary day. I would choose you and this life 1,000 times over." "As would I," Wade agreed, raising her hand to his lips in the same gesture he had used when asking to court her all those years ago. "You have been my greatest blessing, Hannah. The best thing that ever happened to me was getting hungry enough to follow the smell of baking bread to your door." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the peaceful evening. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, could see smoke rising from Sam and Elizabeth's house and from Maggie's cottage near the bakery. Will and his family would be arriving tomorrow for Sunday dinner, continuing the tradition they had maintained for decades. The ranch and bakery continued to thrive under the next generation's management, the legacy Hannah and Wade had built together carrying forward into the future. Their children had learned from their example about partnership and hard work, about balancing independence with interdependence, about building something lasting through love and dedication. Wade and Hannah lived to see their children's children grow into adults, to witness the expansion of their family into a true dynasty. They attended weddings and funerals, celebrated births and mourned losses, always together, always united. Their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built, the constant in a changing world in their final years. As age inevitably caught up with them, they spent most of their time at home, content with simple pleasures. They still baked together sometimes, though their hands were less steady than they once were. They read to each other, told stories about the past, received visitors who came to pay respects and hear their wisdom. Wade passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at the age of 73, with Hannah beside him holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but without despair, grateful for the 53 years they had shared, for the life they had built together. She lived 2 more years, surrounded by family, maintaining her independence and sharp mind until the end. When she died in 1927 at 71, her children felt that she had simply decided it was time to join Wade, unable to bear being apart from him any longer. They were buried side by side in the cemetery in South Pass City, their graves marked with a simple stone that bore their names and a line that Sam chose. Together in life, together in eternity. The funeral was attended by hundreds, a testament to the lives they had lived and the impact they had made on their community. The ranch and bakery continued to operate for generations, family businesses passed down through the bloodline, each generation adding their own innovations while respecting the foundation their ancestors had established. The original ranch house was preserved as a family museum of sorts, maintained carefully with many of Hannah's baking implements and Wade's tools displayed for descendants to see and remember. The story of how Hannah and Wade met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. How he had followed the smell of baking bread to her door, how she had invited a stranger in and fed him, how from that simple act of hospitality had grown a love that lasted a lifetime and built a legacy that endured for generations. Young people in the family heard the story and understood that great things could come from small moments, that being open to possibility and willing to take risks on connection could change everything. Their great-great-grandchildren, living well into the 21st century, still spoke of Hannah and Wade with reverence and affection, proud to carry their bloodline and continue their traditions. The bakery still operated in South Pass City, though much expanded and modernized, still using some of Hannah's original recipes. The ranch remained family-owned, a symbol of persistence and dedication spanning more than a century. But beyond the business success and material legacy, what truly endured was the example Hannah and Wade had set of how to love well, how to build a life together based on respect and partnership, how to face challenges with grace and celebrate joys with gratitude. They had started with almost nothing except their own skills and determination, and they had created something beautiful and lasting. On the wall of the Ranch House Museum hung a photograph taken on their 40th wedding anniversary, showing Hannah and Wade standing together on their front porch, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera with obvious joy and contentment. Visitors looking at that photograph could see the love that radiated between them, could sense the depth of their connection even across decades, and through the barrier of a simple black and white image. Beside the photograph was a framed recipe card in Hannah's careful handwriting, the recipe for the bread she had been baking that morning when Wade first knocked on her door. And next to that was a small placard with a quote attributed to Wade from an interview he had given to the local newspaper on their 50th anniversary, when asked what advice he would give to young couples just starting out. Find someone whose sweetness you want to taste every day, and then spend your life making sure they feel cherished and valued. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every single morning when you wake up. Choose love, choose partnership, choose kindness, and you will build something that lasts forever. Those words had guided their descendants through their own marriages and relationships, had been quoted at weddings and anniversaries, had become part of the family's core values. Hannah and Wade had lived those words, had demonstrated through decades of daily choices what it meant to truly commit to another person, to weather storms together and celebrate victories as one. Their love story, which began with such simple circumstances, a woman baking bread alone and a hungry cowboy following his nose to her door, had blossomed into something epic and enduring. They had built not just a family but a dynasty, not just businesses but institutions, not just a marriage but a partnership that served as a model for everyone who knew them. And in the end, that was perhaps their greatest legacy. Not the land or the businesses or even the children and grandchildren who carried their genes forward, but the example they set of what love could be when nurtured carefully, protected fiercely, and honored daily. They had started with attraction and chemistry, that spark of connection when their eyes first met across her kitchen table. They had built on that foundation with respect and communication, with shared goals and mutual support. And they had sustained it through humor and grace, through forgiveness and flexibility, through the thousand small kindnesses and considerations that make a marriage work over decades. Future generations of the family, facing their own challenges in their own times, looked back to Hannah and Wade as proof that true love was possible, that partnership could be real, that building a life together was worth the effort and sacrifice it required. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the most profound changes in life come from simple moments, from being open to possibility, from following your instincts even when logic might counsel caution. Hannah had been alone, baking bread and humming to herself, not looking for love or expecting her life to change. Wade had been doing his job, riding fence line and thinking about mundane matters of ranch management. But he had followed the smell of baking bread, and she had opened her door, and from those small choices everything else had flowed. They had recognized something special in each other and had been brave enough to pursue it, wise enough to nurture it, and committed enough to sustain it across a lifetime. Their story was proof that fairy tales could be real, that happy endings were possible, That love could last not just until death but beyond it, living on in the memories and hearts of those left behind. Hannah and Wade had found each other, had chosen each other, and had spent 53 years proving every single day that they had chosen wisely. Their love had been tested by hardship and celebrated in joy, had weathered loss and embraced gain, had remained constant through all the changes that life inevitably brings. And so their story ended not with sadness but with celebration, with gratitude for the time they had shared and the legacy they had created. They had lived fully and loved deeply, had built something meaningful that would endure long after they were gone. They had started with bread and ended with an empire, but what mattered most was not what they had accumulated, but how they had loved each other through every moment of their shared journey. The last entry in Hannah's journal, written just days before her death, contained these words: "I have lived a life beyond my wildest dreams, loved more deeply than I knew was possible, and been blessed beyond measure. If I could speak to my younger self, alone in that kitchen baking bread, I would tell her to open the door when the cowboy knocks, to take the risk on love, to trust her instincts. I would tell her that the best decision she will ever make is to let Wade Northfield into her life and her heart. And I would tell her that every day of joy, every challenge overcome, every moment of connection will be worth it. Love well, my younger self. Love bravely. Love without reservation. Because true love, real partnership, is the greatest gift life has to offer, and once you find it, you must hold on to it with everything you have." Those words, like so much of Hannah's wisdom, became part of the family's treasured heritage, passed down and shared, honored and remembered. And visitors to the ranch museum, reading her journal and looking at the photographs and studying the artifacts of her life, understood that they were witnessing the evidence of something rare and beautiful. A love story that had truly lasted forever, a partnership that had built something meaningful, a romance that had started with the simple act of baking bread and had grown into a legacy that would never die.